Welcome back, fellow builders. Today I'm going to be putting these Zoom triple tree forks on my F-Zero gas bike build. For the most part, this was a plug-and-play installation, but I did run into a few little issues along the way, so I'll share my experience. This process should be identical for most gas bike frames, but I can only vouch for the F-Zero and Zeta Dawn version 2. They're identical frames, and they're the beefier of the gas bike frames that I know of. A little bit of additional information so you know what we're working with and exactly why we decided to go with these forks on this frame. Neither the F-Zero or Zeta Dawn come with high-end forks. They may look like it from the sales pictures, and if you're a new builder you see triple trees and you might assume that they're good quality, but that's not the case. As for the F-Zero, in my opinion, the stock triple tree forks that come with that bike are actually pretty decent and capable of withstanding most speeds that a China doll is capable of. I've even pushed these to some rather excessive speeds and punished them under riding conditions which they are nowhere near designed for. They've held up quite well and haven't given me any issues whatsoever. Now I must point out that my experience slightly abusing and pushing the stock F-Zero forks past their intended limitations is not a voucher for you to do the same. It's simply a vote of confidence in their quality for withstanding normal riding conditions. Part of the reason why I'm upgrading them, among many others, is simply that I know if I continue to push them to these limitations for too long, eventually they will fail, and it might be catastrophic. But that being said, if you have the stock F-Zero forks on your bike and you're just using it as a cruiser with maybe some mild high-speed riding on smooth road conditions, they'll probably last a very long time. The same, however, cannot be said for the Zeta Dawn version 2. The forks that come on that may look similar in the photos, but they're significantly poor quality. The stanchions are thinner and flimsier, and the crowns are, well, stamped together metal that's barely held together. So by upgrading the F-Zero with the Zoom forks, I'll put the F-Zero's original forks on the Zeta Dawn. It should be a lot less sketchy riding that bike. Now the Zooms are by no means high-end downhill triple tree forks. Even though they can be advertised as downhill forks, they specifically say on a warning label not to use them for single track or downhill dirt jumps or anything like that. However, for our style of riding, which is mostly just roads, which can be a bit rough at times, they should do the trick. You see, the Zoom forks lack any kind of rebound whatsoever. They're basically just cushions. However, that's probably where they save their money, because the stanchions are significantly thicker than the other bikes, look a lot beefier, and the crowns, which clamp both top and bottom, whereas the stock forks crowns were mostly just for show, these are solid aluminum, a lot beefier than what we've been working with. The thicker stanchions should stand up a lot better to hard braking forces and just give you a more stable ride. This is just my assumptions. Only my first impressions will be given in this video, and we'll figure out how well they hold up in the long run. Better quality and a beefier build aside, one of the other main benefits of these particular forks for me is they have a 20mm through axle which matches up perfectly to the Gemini wheel set. I've been able to get away with using the Gemini wheel set on the stock forks for so long simply because they come with an adapter which allows you to use the standard solid bicycle axle. But the bearings on the Geminis are actually designed to fit a 20mm through axle, which is perfect for us. When moving over to the through axle, you have to have some spacers, and luckily the Gemini wheel set included those as well, and I was fortunate enough to set them aside in a place I remembered and not lose them over the past few months. Now, I'm working with a lot of new parts for the first time, so try to bear with me here. The combination of the sealed bearings in the Gemini wheel set and the 20mm through axle means that, I assume, you need to install these spacers correctly so you don't have anything rubbing against the bearing seal. Correctly, of course, but I say that simply because I was able to find about 3 different orientations which these spacers could be installed, and I think only one of them is correct. The small but wide ring has to rotate with the wheel. It's pressed into the space on top of the bearing. The larger but thinner spacer sits on top of the axle and pretty much doesn't move during operation, but it does contact the inner portion of the bearing. On one side of the axle spacer, there is a small lip so that it touches the inner race but does not contact the seal of the bearing, so you don't have any rubbing there. And the thin ring that's wider also has a lip which captivates the larger spacer.
Everybody got that? Good.
This is confusing, I know, I'm sorry. When it's installed correctly, it seems pretty obvious, as the axle spacer is allowed to move freely, independent of the wheel, the ring spacer, and the axle. In this orientation, you shouldn't have any issues with the bearings rubbing against the seals or any other parts and wearing out. Because that's probably impossible to visualize, I'll just put it in a nutshell for you. Once installed correctly, neither of the spacers should be crushing each other, bound against each other, or contacting the seal of the bearing. And you should be good. Or, better yet, you could all get together and pester Will Kidd to make a video about how to install the spacers on his Gemini wheels with the 20mm through axles. There were no instructions in the box, and some of us ain't that smart. Anyways, these spacers centered the wheel perfectly, and I was able to move my brake caliper onto the new forks without any issues or additional parts. So we're plug and play there and good to go. Now, because the Zoom forks are through axle design, I don't think there's any way to adapt them to a standard bicycle wheel axle, so keep that in mind. There are other variations of this fork online which you should be able to find, but generally if you're upgrading to something this beefy, you're probably going with a better wheel set anyways. Now for installing these Zoom forks onto the F-Zero or Zeta Dawn version 2, I have some good news here as well, as it's pretty much plug and play. You don't need to buy any extra hardware or adapters to make this work. You'll be able to use the stock headset bearings, races, and seals, though you should consider picking up some extra stem spacers just in case the tube is a little too long for your headset, and an extra flower nut for the stem cap unless you want to reuse the old one, but that may require cutting it out of the tube, which is what I did with the Zeta Dawn forks because these are too sketchy to use on anything, so I just cut that tube and punched out the old flower nut. But if you don't want to go through that headache, just buy a new one because the Zoom forks don't come with one. Because the stem spacers and end cap are important when it comes to setting the bearings and making sure that you don't have excessive play in your fork, it's advised not to try and get away without using these. If you're not familiar with adjusting threadless headsets, I highly recommend watching some other videos on YouTube to make sure you get it right. Because without enough spacers under and or on top of your stem, you'll never be able to get it set properly. Now on to where I ran into an issue, which admittedly most of you probably won't, because this appeared to be a defect in the machining of a small part on these Zoom forks. I'm not sure what this part's called, nor am I 100% in my assumption of what it's for, but I do assume that it's meant to space and center the lower bearing race for the bottom crown. Unfortunately, mine appeared to be machined crooked and had a bead of welding solder on one side, meaning that it was impossible for me to both seat and center the lower bearing race. I made a brief attempt to remachine this part and work some magic on it so that the bearing race would sit flush, but I was unsuccessful. At first I wasn't sure. I couldn't think of any reason why this part would need to be machined off-center, but when looking at other forks online, including the super cheap ones I took off the bike, these pieces are all machined flat. After stepping back and taking some time to examine the forks and all the intricate systems and how they connect and hold together, I made the conclusion that this piece is mostly just for centering the bottom race and doesn't play any other part in the structural integrity of the forks. That being said, I took a Dremel to it and cut it off because it was really pissing me off. Alright, so moving right along, we got it all buttoned up, put together, and the next day we took it out for a ride, so let's check out some of that test ride footage and then we'll come back with our conclusion. Alright, don't think I've started this thing since I took it on that 60-mile trip out to Tom's place for the graveyard. I was busy focusing so much on the front of the bike that I forgot to recheck my pedal chain. And I don't know how it dropped. The chain tension was pretty good last time I rode it, but oh well. She dropped and the tire grabbed it and snapped it. Pretty much like snapping a toothpick when these bikes grab the chain, so that's unfortunate. Our motor chain tension should be fine. Yeah, it's damn near perfect. So we'll need a bit of time to tell you for sure what I think about these forks, but based off of other user experiences in the community and recommendations that were given to me for these forks, I don't expect any issues. Most of you know, I don't race my bike, I don't push excessive speeds all the time, and for the most part, I just ride this bike on the roads with 30 miles an hour, give or take. But as well built as these things are, relatively speaking, it's nice to have just one less thing which I'll no longer have to worry about on the bike. For obvious reasons, during the test ride, I didn't really push these hard, just in case. But man, did they make a big difference in the feel of the bike. Not only does it feel more planted and connected to the road, but, well, it's smoother for some reason. I guess all the little jostles and imperfections in the stock forks, which are pretty much wiped out by these sturdy beasts, it's just something you feel right away. In short, it just improves your ride quality significantly. I'm not here to try and sell you these or tell you that you need them. I'm just giving you my experience with them so far. I wasn't able to find much when it comes to anything you'd have to run into during the installation process about these forks on YouTube, so I figured this video is going to help somebody. Next upgrade I'll probably add to this bike is a beefy set of brake rotors to the front so we can take full advantage of these forks. And at least now, when we finally do get around to putting the hybrid motor back on the bike, I'll have a bit more confidence with the setup. So I hope you guys got some useful information out of today's video, or at the very least, were mildly entertained. And until next time, ride safe.